Welcome, everyone, to another episode of What's Working, brought to you by Regions. I'm Cam Marston. The focus of the show, as always, workplace, workforce trends. We scour the planet to find the people that can talk the best about the trends that are shaping your workplace, your workforce, and creating opportunities for you, which is the conversation of today's show. Before we begin, I'll give you a little snapshot of where we're going to go with the content today, and then give you some updates on some of the projects that we're working on that I think will be of interest to you. Today, the conversation is going to be the business of podcasting. There are now 1 million podcasts available in this land of ours, not even out overseas. This is USA alone. 1 million podcasts, over 30 million episodes. How can there be a business opportunity in something so popular? So the marketplace is glutted with them, and we're going to talk to Johnny Gwin about this. Johnny runs Deep Fried Studios. Content management is his expertise, and he's going to explain to us the business of podcasting, what it means for you, what it should mean for me if I did it right, and what the future looks like. Now, one of the things that I've been working hard on behind the scenes that I'm proud to say is finally beginning to take place is our July 15th webinar with the author of The Fred Factor, Mark Sanborn. Mark has agreed to it. We're recording some commercials for it tomorrow, and we're going to look at the changing environment of the workplace. It's called the post-COVID workplace, the 3 most important changes you need to make now. This will be on at noon on July 15th, where Mark will lead us through the changes he's discovered are necessary post-COVID. We'll be talking about employees, why motivation is no longer enough. We'll be talking about teams, how the look and feel of teams must change in the new normal, and customers, what they want from you right now, and finally, your organization, how culture trumps structure, and much more. Happy to say that we now have Mellow Mushroom on board. They're offering a 25% discount on pizzas on July 15th related to the coupon code that they're going to get upon your registration. So what I want you to do is put an invitation on your calendar for your team to meet in your workplace or at their desk at home, get a pizza, and listen to the content from Mark Sanborn. Your investment for Mark's content, the 25% off coupon, as well as a coupon for Mark's online bookstore, and you can get any one of his 8 books, the leading one, which is The Fred Factor, is a $49 investment. $49, July 15th, noon. And soon, at What's Working Cam, you'll be able to register that online. You will be able to register online. Now, we continue to get some good feedback on Take It or Leave It. Take it. What are you going to take in the post-COVID environment that you're going to keep with you? What about your business practices are good enough that you hope to never drop away that came as a result of COVID? What are you ready to leave behind? What are you ready to get rid of as a result? And the way it's surging back again, what might we need to remember how we used to do and get ready to do again due to the resurgence of the COVID? And the end of the show today at 1:52, I will list the best ideas that I got from Johnny Gwin today, and then we're going to put L.C. May on the line. He's going to be our motivational, inspirational segment at the end of the hour. L.C. May is the grandson of Clyde May. They make Clyde May's Alabama-style whiskey, and L.C. is a great spokesman for his family's whiskey. Don't forget to find us on social media. Look us up under Instagram, What's Working with Cam Marston. Look us up under Facebook, What's Working with Cam Marston. You can find us on Twitter as well. We're becoming more and more active on that, and I'm doing my best to record videos for all these social media platforms. It's a brave new world out there, and I'm doing my best to get into it. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston, brought to you by Regions. When we come back from break, the business of podcasting with Johnny Gwin. You're listening to What's Working. What's Working is brought to you by Regions. I'm Cam Marston, and we're going to focus on this episode of the business of podcasting. Prior to coming into the station today, I reached into the to the great wide internet and found some pieces of data for you that I was frankly surprised by. This is the compilation of 3 reports. The first, Edison Research, the second, Nielsen, and the third, iTunes information. I told you a couple of the pieces prior to the break. There are currently over 1 million podcasts. There are 30 million episodes. 50% of all U.S. homes are podcast fans. I mean, that's excellent penetration there. A couple of others. Comedy is the most popular podcasting genre, followed by education and news. The 48% of monthly podcast listeners in the U.S. are between the ages of 12 and 34. Podcast listeners are active on all social media, and this is the one that leaps out to me. 69% of podcast listeners agree, or 69% of consumers agreed that podcast ads made them aware of new products and services. 69% of podcast listeners agree that podcast ads made them aware of new products or services. So we are all familiar with podcasts. I mean, we're covered up with them. I looked at my phone before coming in, and I think I've got a dozen that I subscribe to regularly. We're all familiar with them, but what is the business case for them? If you're a small business out there, if you're a manager or a leader, what is the value of a podcast? And there's so many different ways to get into this subject matter. So I've brought in the expert. Johnny Gwin runs Deep Fried Studios here in Mobile. He's both a friend and I am a customer of his studios. I utilize his studios and I utilize his brain to think about this stuff. Johnny, thank you for your time. Welcome to What's Working.
I am so happy to be on a microphone and knowing that I don't have to edit the show after I'm done.
Well, we haven't asked you about that yet. So imagine the listener out there, typically a small business owner, influencer in this marketplace, whatever their marketplace may be. They're more likely going to be male than female for this show. Make the business case for a podcast. That's a wide open question, but I'm going to let you attack it from any side you want.
Okay, I spent 20 years in advertising, and you want anyone to get to know what you do, why you do it, and why you do it better than someone else, right?
That's
across the board, right? Simple way of saying advertising. Podcasting is a way, and a very affordable way, to put out information that does all that, and not only that, connects you to the people who listen to you. Because if you're entertaining and informative, now you've got the magnets you want, because I want to listen to the show and you're giving me value. And along the way, if you're good, you grow reliability and trust, which is what you want in the sales funnel. And all of a sudden you become a local celebrity, someone putting out great information, and then people get value out of it, and people listen to you, and then they go, oh, you're the accounting guy, you're the insurance guy, you're the car sales guy, you're the knitting lady. You start to create something that hopefully you love and you're passionate about, because that comes out in the show. And all of a sudden, that job and that passion is now being listened to by micro audiences, or maybe even broader audiences out there, to get to know you and what you do.
There is definitely an ego appeal in being known. I mean, it's a core human element, is stroke my ego. I want to be known. However, tie the business case to me. No one's bought anything yet. So are you assuming that if I'm known as the insurance guy or the knitting lady, there's a sale at the other end of this?
At the end of the day, there's the hobbyist podcaster, and then there's the business podcaster, right? I have to ask you before we get started, what is the reason why we're doing this show?
So what you're saying is, hypothetically, you're leading someone into podcasting. That's the question.
Right, because if they say, oh, well, I just love podcasts and I want to do X, Y, and Z, I'm like, well, we have to go through it. What are we doing? What's the 3 takeaways that every listener will get out of it? What's the value? And then, by the way, I'll say, what is the call to action, CTA, at the end? And by the way, radio stations sitting right here, they have to have a strong call to action. What are you asking me to do? And if you don't have that, if you don't have a strong web presence, you don't have a strong social media presence, you can't lead somebody who's listening to your podcast to say, you want more information from me? You want to know how I can help you? And you can't get them to there. You shouldn't be doing the podcast yet. You've got to get those elements down to be able to sell yourself and get a listener to become a lead for your company. And podcasting is a way to do it for a very small amount of money compared to many other mediums out there that draws them into that sales funnel. And podcasting is a way to do it.
So one of the challenges that I know with 1 million podcasts and over 30 million episodes is getting found.
There are 60 million blogs out there, and people still blog, right? it actually still is a small pond compared to blogs. So you can be found. But the idea is, are you going to be the next Joe Rogan? Probably not. But if you can get the right 180, 200 people listening to you in a small market, you have a small, say you're selling locally, what do you care about somebody in Wyoming listening to you anyway? You have to find the right audience for what you are doing and how that comes back to you in either community value you're giving, one you just might love and never wanted to be on the radio and you couldn't get on the radio and this is the way you're doing it. It's a hobby for you, but your business is tied to it. Or you're talking to the right amount of micro people who come in and you get 8, 10, 12 new customers from that podcast, depending on your cost of service, cost of product. You might have come way ahead out on the production of that podcast.
Let's tell the Joe Rogan story. I want to keep getting into this, but if you mentioned Joe Rogan, people like you and me are very familiar with him and the recent transaction that he was a part of. He is an anomaly in the world, to say the least.
He's a giant.
Yeah. Go ahead and give us the numbers that you know about
Joe
him.
Rogan's been doing this for 16 years, probably even longer than that. I think he's the world's best interviewer. He did it out of a love of wanting to interview people. Yeah. And he did it on a video first, and then podcast and video, and now it's both. He has 60 million earballs and eyeballs a month on his show. By the way, let me give you what those numbers mean. 60 million, okay, that they can actually track. That is more than all of the networks on TV combined. That's the power he has. And they listen to him for 3.5 hours. Think about that. They say no one will watch a TV show longer than a couple of minutes. They definitely won't watch TV ads, right? They're listening to this man for 3.5 hours do his show and hanging on every word.
Yeah. And he sold it recently for?
He sold his company, not himself, the Joe Rogan, whatever, podcasting, his media company, $160 million to Spotify.
Yeah, to Spotify.
And so what Spotify is doing, they bought those 60 million people. They could care less what he's doing. They want those 60 million people transferring over to be exclusively listening to Joe Rogan on Spotify.
Similar thing with SiriusXM and what was his name?
Howard Stern.
Howard Stern.
Changed radio. Yeah.
It changed the radio. Yeah. All right, let's get back into, I don't want to call him the mom and pop podcaster, but I
do. I love the mom and pop podcaster.
The people like me, perhaps, the people like you're deep into this much more so than me, and are looking at this, trying to determine if this is a good way to spend time, good way to spend money, because you and I had a conversation recently. I bought a piece of equipment, and you looked at that equipment, and you said, in order to get this piece of equipment for video use up to speed, we got to spend more money on lights and microphones and everything. Is a podcast the same way from your point of view? In other words, I come in and record one podcast with you. I now have spent, I'm going to make a number up, I don't know what it would cost, $350. Is it going to cost me another $3,000 to promote it?
Depends on how much you want to spend to that, but I would say no. Now, the barrier of podcasting is much lower to get into it than almost anything in advertising, and video is very expensive. So the barrier means it doesn't have to be as professional as what I'm creating. By the way, there's great podcasters out there that use a $100 microphone into their laptop and are so good at what they do and don't even edit the show very well, don't even produce the show very well, and put it up on these systems that anybody can get access to. Now, there is some learning involved in this, but they have thousands and thousands of listeners because of the value they bring and what they do. But it costs them what? $150 a month? There's nothing in advertising I can give you for $150 a darn month. So the barrier is very small. How good you want to be and how professional you want to be is like anything else. You're a golfer, you're going to buy better clubs, right? You're going to start taking lessons, all those kind of things. Same way with podcasting, same way with marketing, those kind of things. It's easy to get in, but if you stick with it, you're going to get better. But as you go up the ranks and you want to get better, you're going to spend some money. But it's nothing like video. It's nothing like traditional advertising. Go look at what a billboard costs. One billboard for 30 days. You're looking at $3,800. I could do probably a season for you, 12 episodes with a brand for your logo for probably $4,000.
You know, I was speaking to a guy with iHeartRadio not long ago, and he said no one looks at billboards anymore. When they come to an intersection and their car comes to a stop, they stare into their phone. It's a part of our lexicon of the white noise of our world.
Yeah. That's the beauty of podcasting. This is the beauty of radio, by the way. I'm a huge radio fan. I've always been a huge radio fan. Radio to me is more interesting than TV because it makes the human brain have to imagine what that person looks like. And when you listen to it, it's almost intimate. It's very interesting, especially if they're really good. And so the human brain listens to that voice, and you like that person. Mm-hmm. That's the trick, man. If you can influence somebody, you got to get them to like you and listen to you and trust you first. But that human brain starts imagining what that person looks like. And so now that voice has become a part of you. And all of a sudden, that person is now tied to you a certain way. Almost when you see that person, it looks nothing like you imagine. And it's kind of a good thing and a bad thing. But it's a very powerful medium, and they hold on to your words because they are either getting value from it or entertainment out of it. Billboards, again, advertising. I love great graphic design, but it's so ubiquitous, we lose the value of it. But people love stories. They love tips. They love things to give them shortcuts. And anytime you can do that for somebody in an entertaining way, you've won half the game.
So back in the day, Johnny, when I was getting into the presentation, seminar, keynote speech business, we were all very protective of our content.
Correct.
We never gave our slides away. We made people sign ridiculous documents if they wanted to record any part of it. Mm-hmm. And my model from the get-go, and I was listening to the experts at the time, but I kept thinking back to the Grateful Dead. Record our concerts.
Nice. Yeah.
Record the concerts. We don't care. The Grateful Dead seemed to have no problems generating an audience throughout their career, and they gave their content away. Podcasting is somewhat similar. You're going to get experts on the airwaves. That's not the literal form, that's not the terminology, but we're going to get experts on, and they're giving away their expertise. Certainly there are some people out there that are, let's say, in the knitting business, right, that are going to say, you know what, this is my secret sauce. And according to this dude on the radio right now, Johnny Gwin, I should be telling people how I make my secret sauce. Mm-hmm. Explain that to me.
Because they get to know the person behind the secret sauce, and that's the magic. It's not. Most things in a commodity world is A, B's, and C's, and it's templates. You are putting something out. If very few of us are putting out something that is really quite unique, we have our own spin on it. But once you become a personality that is a trusted and seen expert personality, people learn to like you, and that is what separates. It's not transactional, it's relationships. And you build relationships with the human voice. That's how you do that, different than how you were saying of just putting out your great content.
Yeah, so it's an imagined, like you said, an imagined individual and a relationship that they become, I don't know, affiliated with, connected to, fond of, something like that. Now, there are people out there, I'm certain, that are thinking, I could never sit down behind a microphone and begin to do this. Is podcasting a learned skill?
Yeah.
Is it just like Michael Jordan, he had some talent, but he had to refine it through work. Is that the same case? Yes.
Anything to get at a high level, you have to put time to it. Some people have a natural gift for it. Some people I have to help. I coach. And that's the beauty of not going live. The beauty of the first couple of shows we do is long and arduous. It's like watching paint dry, and it's painful. Yeah. But once we do the show and edit, and once we start understanding the format, even though it's an open, meaning radio has times. We have to be off the air every 7 minutes, every 12 minutes, whatever, right? Podcast can be as long as you want it to be. In general. Yeah. I like the idea of once you understand your format and your organization and your prep for the show, the fun stuff is making it. But you have to have the organization in place. You have to have the plan. You have to have the purpose. All the things like a business model needs to have a business. I mean, you need a model for a business. You need a plan, a purpose, and a model for your podcast.
I'm familiar with some where a person will interview the expert. Yes. The expert is uncomfortable going behind a microphone without being interviewed, mm-hmm. and they use a interview format to convey their expertise. And
if you've done it well, you've prepped that person saying, as the host, I'm trying to get this from you to let my audience know these three things. Anything more than that is frosting on the cake. But I got to get those and it's prepping. Do the research. Don't come and do a meeting with an expert, with someone, and you haven't done the research on them. It doesn't do them any favors, does you no favors. And here's the thing. I have a podcast on my network called the Insurance Guys Podcast. It's about insurance salesmen. And I would say, oh my gosh, how boring is that? They are hilarious. They're funny. They teach other insurance people how to be better at their job. And the one thing they've said in their 100 episodes, they have slowly gone up the ladder between nobodies in their industry to interviewing the CEO of of Nationwide. They've interviewed the biggest people in the industry on their little show, and now they are influencers in the insurance business because of their podcast. That asking that big person to come on your show is giving you credibility by having that person on the show. So you're building your internal network by asking somebody if they agree to be on your show. It's a really big deal. Or you take someone who started a podcast in another city that you're friends with, and y'all can cross promote your shows together. So that way you're making internal networking for customers and inside of your business to be seen as an expert.
Again, the word I want to say right now is concern, but that's not the right word. The so what, I guess, is at some point this has got to be a revenue generating effort here.
Yeah.
So to get the CEO of Nationwide, if I'm the insurance guys on my show, you got to look at each other and say, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is huge.
Because 100 episodes ago, they wouldn't have taken our call.
We were interviewing each other.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And now suddenly I've got one of the nation's largest insurance company CEOs as a guest on my show, and he's doing it for his own benefit as much as for ours. But the question comes up again is, so what? What are we going to do about this? Now, we're about to go to break, and when we come back from break, I want to talk about ways of monetizing this type of thing so that the people out there like you, like me, can see how this idea of podcasting progresses down the road and turns into revenue. So when we get back from break, we'll discuss the monetizing part of podcasting. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. We'll be right back. I'm Cam Marston. You're listening to What's Working. What's Working is brought to you by Regions. Happy to hear that last ad. We will be interviewing somebody from the Alabama Deep Sea Fishing Rodeo for the original edition, What's Working with Cam Marston. That'll be aired on a Wednesday evening somewhere around the rodeo, the challenges that they face due to COVID and all this kind of stuff. They got an interesting story to tell. They've always had an interesting story to tell. They're going to have a new interesting story to tell. All right. Back to Johnny Gwin, back to the business of podcasting. I want to talk to you more, Johnny, about monetizing this. Now, there's the Joe Rogan style, recognizing that he is abnormal, but he sold his empire to Spotify. Somebody like me, every one of my shows gets converted into a podcast, and we at this point have 150 some odd podcasts that have been converted from the original airing broadcast into the podcast. I have to admit to you, how to monetize things like this are of interest to me. So go into the different theories and ways to monetize things, whether it be mine or somebody else's. Give me some ideas.
Number one, you have increased your footprint and people knowing who you are by just being on the airwaves and putting things out, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So one, you can sell yourself. And services are actually easier to sell than products are. So you are an expert in, let's just say, the quilting thing again.
Yep.
You can talk about quilting and bring on your friends to talk about quilting. And then what if you made your own quilting patterns that were only available to people listening to your podcast, and they can go to your website and they'll give you you sign up and get the email to that person, the Quilt Lady podcast. You get a free, quilt model thing, and now you get the email. Now you can email market with these people who, by the way, have done 3 things already: listen to you, subscribe to your podcast, and sent you an email. Is it Zig Ziglar that says you have to do 7 things to a consumer before they buy from you? Now you've already got them doing 3 things. You send them a free thing, they use the quilt thing, and guess what you do now? Every week you send them an email saying, thanks for listening. By the way, the next show is so-and-so. By the way, check out my other 12 other patterns I have on my store. That's one way of doing it. And service is a lot easier. Pay for me to do whatever I'm talking about. I'm great at it, blah, 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 blah. The other one is to create a podcast, work on getting the numbers up because you can actually see how many people have downloaded it from. You can see all that information. It's amazing. And then you create a bigger social media footprint. You, again, become a local celebrity at some level. And at that point, you can actually sell your own show yourself. You could take a vertical or a horizontal marketer with you, something in your type of business where you kind of work together and say, hey, I need you to, if you could, pay me $200 for each show I do, and I will let you be the presenting sponsor of my podcast. Now, it might not pay for the whole production, but it's offsetting your cost for that. Let me give you an example. There's a fishing show I work on that has been paid for by a local insurance person, and he doesn't record anything. He just is the presenting sponsor of this podcast that goes out every Thursday afternoon. And it has 15,000 listeners every month. Well, he only sells one thing when he asks you to get in touch with him: boat insurance. That's it. And as we have talked to him, it's the best money he's ever spent because how cheap it was and what he's gotten back from that. Again, find people that are partners that help you that way. Now, if you are one of these people, just like a garage band, right? There's 20 garage bands in every city, and everyone thinks they're going to be a rock star and they're going to make tons of money, and they never do. The podcaster who thinks they're going to be the star, not the business expert, not the person that monetizes this with a smart business model, but thinks they're going to be a Joe Rogan, it's just like anything else. You're not probably going to be that person. And that's someone who buys your show and goes on Westwood One, or Sean Sullivan decides, man, your show is so great. How can we figure out how to partner or monetize your show to be on my network? That is the really hard way to do that.
Yeah, those are the freaks of nature. If you go in expecting celebrity and expecting, spotlight and celebrity, that is not the correct attitude to go into there. Now, there's something that occurs to me, and it is this. As a business owner that may be listening, many are likely unaware of the inexpensive opportunities to get involved in podcasting from a promotional point of view. In other words, I work with XYZ window cleaner company.
Yep.
I should find somebody that's podcast mirrors my customer. I mean, is that a strategic way of thinking about promoting your business?
So before we ever do a podcast, I get you to sit with me and we go through a very long series of questions, because if you won't do this with me, you're not going to commit to do the podcast. You have to give me as much work as I'm giving you back. If you're the host, you're the star, man. You're the one that matters, but you have to commit to me. One of the questions that we ask on that is, could you think of, not right now, I'm talking down the road. You've been very successful at this. Give me a list of some sponsors that you think would be really smart for your type of market, your type of audience, and your type of show. And I get them to think that way because it also helps me to think about their brand. But you're already thinking that way of like, oh, it'd be a really smart person to advertise on my show would be this person. A lot of times it's somebody you're already doing work with, you're already partnering with. Also, bring them on for a series of shows. And the idea is like, hey, the first one's for free, but I want to do 3 of these in a series to teach somebody. Would you be willing to help me pay or offset the cost for you to be my guest? And I've given you all this time, you're getting free exposure. And that way they could use all those shows to go on their websites, to go on their blogs, because all this podcast stuff is shareable. There's an embed, there's links, there's everything. There's what is the value of you who've never been on TV, never been on radio, a business owner, make that deal with your friend to talk about the show you're doing. Well, we take photos in the studio of a very professional studio with headphones on, and we're putting that out through the studio. You're getting value for that. There's so much content that can be made from 1 or 2 podcast episodes that now you've got all of that rich content marketing that your social media really needs. Like I said, the world does not need another Ben Franklin quote on Twitter on a Monday. It doesn't. But if you had a podcast, even one episode that you're a guest on, right? You could quote yourself and do that and have many quotes of that. Imagine if you had 50 shows like that. And that's a way of thinking about that.
Quality of audience. We've made this reference once before, the quality of audience. And it's something you've told me offline when we've chatted about this previous days. Kim, it's less important how many downloads you get. I mean, there's no denying a big download number is nice to have.
Right.
Less important than how many downloads you get. More important is the quality of the listener.
Who's listening? Right.
Who's listening and how do they relate to you? Talk to me about that.
Okay, I have a friend of mine who has a podcast that has a very specific thing in aeronautical engineering. Not a very huge market in the world, right? It's called narrowcasting. It's a tiny little market. He has a podcast, and that's what software as service is that industry, SaaS, right?
Yeah.
He has 180 people that listen to his podcast. He makes about $70,000 a year off that podcast because he has the right 180 people buying his software from his podcast. There's no way he's going to be Joe Rogan talking about aeronautical engineering software, and that's what he does. So again, finding the right pond to fish in. How big's the pond, or does it need to be a river, or does it need to be an ocean? It's all, like any good advertising, who and what are you saying? Does it separate yourself, and who are you talking to? And then spend and risk the amount of calculated risk, money, to get a return on that. But your first season as a podcaster, I will tell you right now, I tell everybody, I say 12 episodes is a season in podcasting for me. Your goal for the first season is to get a show that you like and good. The second season is to grow the audience more and start playing around with who's my sponsor. So by the 25th episode, then we start talking about monetization. I've had it done before, where people have started to get really some pop from it. But your third season, that 25th episode, is when we're really starting to get the idea of we have to make this make sense, has to monetize, has to make sense as a marketing vehicle, has to make sense as a monetizing vehicle. And at that point, if we don't hit those goals we set for ourselves, then it's time to either move on from me or not do podcasting anymore.
I think people find that they find a groove once they get used to this.
Yes, they love it, actually. The ones that love it, and they can't wait to do it every week.
And they hit a stride, they hit a groove, they hit a theme, they hit a what's the word? I guess a theme for these types of things. So much so that the listener expects that same theme. And as you told me at one point in the past, that you can tell them, the podcast host, once they've done all those things you've talked about, developed credibility, deliver good content on a reliable basis, entertaining, informative, you can tell the listener to buy something and they'll do it.
Okay, that's that Pew Edison stuff you were saying?
Yeah.
Before, there's numbers. Okay, I've worked in advertising for, again, 20 years. And remember the numbers? You ever heard the numbers people say of what a successful ad campaign looks like with that percentage of people doing an engagement, meaning they do something you ask them to do. I think direct mail might be 2%. So a 2% direct mail engagement is something like an A+. I think 3% might put you in the Advertising Hall of Fame. Not kidding. TV is really weird. Radio is actually really good because it's almost on the side of podcasting. But podcasting is weird. That people that subscribe to you, here's what Pew Edison's saying. That people that subscribes to you, listens to you more than 6 episodes, they have an 80% likelihood to do something you ask them to do. 80. So visit a website to buy something that we use in the studio. And there is nothing in the advertising world that I've seen with that type of power.
80%.
80%.
I'd like to remind everybody about the webinar that'll be playing on July 15th, Wednesday,
Nice.
July 15th with Mark Sanborn. You can find more out about the webinar, and you should be attentive to this webinar at what'sworkingcam.com. Actually, that link is coming soon. Being somewhat tongue-in-cheek, Johnny, we're about to go to break. How do they find you? How do people find you?
DeepFriedStudios.com and JohnnyGwin.com.
JohnnyGwin.com, DeepFriedStudios.com. Undoubtedly a incredible resource for content marketing, and I think that's the term that needs to be used. Content marketing is a whole different way of looking at the podcast versus advertising versus social media. Content marketing is a way of gathering valuable stuff that's within your domain of expertise, organizing it in a logical way, and delivering it through what is still a fairly new marketing venue. It's amazing. This is a podcast producer is another one of the job titles that didn't exist 5 to 6 years ago.
We're building a mountain of information, and then you mine the inside of it for the gold. So it's just, there's tons of stuff from one episode of your podcast, tons of marketing, tons of content, tons of social media stuff from one episode.
Yeah, I'm excited. I might have to look into this podcast stuff. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. It's brought to you by Regions. We'll be back with L.C. May, Clyde May's Alabama-style whiskey. It's 1:52 p.m., which means it's time for the notes from today's show with Johnny Gwin. Johnny Gwin with Deep Fried Studios. Here's a handful of things that I've written down. Number 1, content marketing is the way forward. Content marketing, having good content. Number 2, give away your expertise. There's no reason to shelter it. There's no reason to protect it. You got to give away your expertise, and people will come to you for it. Number 3, be a guest on a show. Have a guest on your show. Give and take in regards to being a guest. Number 4, what I heard him say, he didn't use these words, but you got to commit to the process. I think I remember hearing somebody say that 50% of podcasts never get over 10 episodes. These are hobbyists that think it's fun, and then once they get into it, they realize it's work, and they never get over 10 episodes. From what Johnny says, it takes at least 10, and 2 years is better, 24, to become good or noted at what it is you do. And number 5, publicize. You publicize the fact that you have a podcast, and you publicize what's in the podcast. All right. I'm turned on about podcasts again, have always been, but it's now time to go into what is called the quote-unquote motivational, inspirational section of the show, where we try to finish off every week. L.C. May is the grandson, maybe he's the great-grandson, of great Alabama bootlegger Clyde May. They're now legally making whiskey up in the Troy area. L.C. was a guest on the show, I want to say back in the fall. L.C., thanks for your time. Welcome back to What's Working.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be back on.
Yeah. How are things going in the whiskey business these days? I asked an epidemiologist on this show not long ago, during times of COVID, what do you think about alcohol? And her answer was, yes, absolutely. I'm wondering if that's been the case for your brand at the same time.
Well, with when it comes to liquor sales in most states during this COVID situation, in most places, liquor stores have been considered an essential business. So for the most part, it's kind of like the old saying goes, during good times and bad times, people are still drinking.
Yes.
So from that point of view, things continue to stay strong. However, it's a very market by market situation, especially when you look at the state of Alabama. They handled it one way with a majority of the liquor that's sold in the state of Alabama is done so through the ABC stores, which are owned by the states. And I believe they closed like 80 of their stores for about a month or month and a half. They're now reopened, but that did have a small effect because when you look at, your number one salesman shutting down half their stores for a month, that has its effect. But for the most part, we've come through this situation. I know it's still ongoing, but we've, battled the storm and done as well as could be expected.
Now, when you and I last spoke in the fall, you were talking about a new facility, a distillery being built in Troy. Is that still on track, or did you have to shut that work down due to the COVID?
We didn't have to shut the work down. We were still so the most important thing with this distillery we're building in Troy that a lot of people didn't realize is where we're building the facility, there was no existing structure or roadways there. So, because it was basically an old horse farm, just pasture land. So, the first step we've had to do is, kind of get infrastructure started. And I don't want to say that, COVID halted or stopped anything. Did it delay it a little? Maybe a little bit, but we're still on track in terms of starting the infrastructure here in the next month or so during the summer, and then the actual groundbreaking for the buildings and the facility itself will be there soon after.
Yeah. So are you guys brewing? It's not brewing, it's distilling anything new and unique? Has the perhaps it's not too much slower for you, but has the COVID time allowed you guys to experiment with new recipes? Is anything beneficial going to come of this time for you guys?
In terms of new recipes, anything with the unique thing about whiskey and bourbon is, or specifically in our industry, is that, when you make this product, especially with the quality that we stand for, you're looking at a minimum age of 3, 4, 5, 6 years. So for the most part, anything new recipe-wise, that'll be a little bit further down the pipeline, so to speak. But a lot of the projects that we have planned for this year, including things like the same product but in new sizes, and we're doing a single barrel program where different accounts around the state will get to actually hand pick and select a barrel. Things like that we had planned for, that is still happening and continuing, and COVID had no effect on kind of those new items coming to market. That's still on track to happen.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. It's nice to connect with you again, LC. Again, LC May, great-grandson of Clyde May. Clyde May's Whiskey, based here in Alabama with a new distillery coming out in Troy. I want to thank Johnny Gwin for his expert advice on the podcasting world. We got another show working for you for Thursday, the live show tomorrow night. Listen for Ed Bridgman, who's talking about the new world of RV campgrounds, RV homesteads. This should be interesting. You listen to What's Working, brought to you by Regions. Have a good day.